Sometimes the darkest things don't hide in shadows. They stand right in daylight, amidst family laughter, on paths we thought were safe. Summer 1994. Litchfield County, Maine. A 3-day family reunion at a lakeside campground near Sabattus Lake, where children in orange life jackets ran between grills sizzling with hot dogs and old country songs playing from a cassette radio. Meline Crane, 9 years old, was last seen playing hide-and-seek near the forest's edge with her cousins around 5 p.m. 10 minutes later, she vanished. No screams, no blood, no drag marks. The family assumed she'd wandered to another cabin. They searched the entire site. 2 hours later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, local police were called. 31 people, relatives, neighbors, nearby campers, were questioned. 6 K-9 units were deployed. A helicopter scanned a 5-mile radius around the lake, but nothing turned up. Nothing. Meline became the girl who vanished during a family reunion. A cold case frozen in time. No arrests, no answers, no closure. And then, exactly 30 years later, in the summer of 2024, a woman, someone who had been at that reunion, returned to the old lake grounds. Within 7 days, something happened that forced police to reopen the case, drew national media attention, and left millions of Americans asking, for 30 years, have we trusted the wrong person? Summer 2024. Litchfield, Maine. Clare Donovan, 38, sat alone in her aging Subaru, parked along a grassy ridge near Sabattus Lake. It was just past 6 a.m. The sun was still veiled behind thin fog. The wind skimmed the lake's surface like a whisper from something long buried. She unlocked the steering wheel but didn't open the door. Her fingers clutched the grip, knuckles pale. Sweat gathered under her sleeves despite the cool air. In front of her stood the tree line, the same woods she had once run into at age 9, and where someone else had never returned. In 1994, Clare had been a quiet girl from suburban Hartford. That summer, her extended family, nearly 30 people, gathered for a 3-day reunion at Cedar Ridge campgrounds. There were tents, BBQs, games of hide-and-seek, and freezing swims in Sabattus Lake. But on the second day, around 5 p.m., Meline Crane, age 9, Clare's cousin and best friend, ran into the woods during a game of hide-and-seek and never came back. Clare remembered the moment panic spread through the group, the adults screaming her name, her grandmother's voice cracking like glass, the wail of sirens, flashlights cutting through pine trees as tall as buildings. And most of all, Clare remembered the guilt, because just before Meline vanished, she had invited Clare to follow her deeper into the woods for a better hiding spot. Clare had said no. She didn't know that would be the last time she saw her. No one did. Almost 30 years passed. Her family fractured. Her parents divorced. The reunion stopped after 1996 when the police officially declared Meline's case cold. Clare carried the memory like a private curse. In high school, she suffered panic attacks, recurring nightmares of the forest, and a constant creeping sense that something had been left unsaid. Then, in April of this year, while cleaning her late grandmother's attic, she discovered a locked wooden box and a small key hidden beneath the bed. Inside, an unsent letter addressed to Sheriff Wilkins, the chief investigator in 1994. A VHS tape with shaky handwriting, "Do not show Clare." And a photo taken during the afternoon, Meline vanished. One detail haunted her. In the background of the photo, near the forest's edge, stood a woman in a white knit coat and wide-brimmed hat, staring directly at the camera. She wasn't a relative. No one in the family recognized her, and in her hand was the arm of a small girl, long brown hair visible under the brim. A girl who looked just like Meline. Now, Clare was back at Sabattus Lake, the place where she once stood, laughed, and turned away from someone in their final moment. She stepped out of the car. The damp grass soaked through her sneakers. The lake lapped gently at the shore, like a voice murmuring from underground. In her hand, she held the blown-up photo. She began matching landmarks, trees, shoreline, sun angle, to pinpoint where the mystery woman had stood, and then she saw it. Just beyond the trees, right where the woman had stood in 1994, sat a small wooden cabin, freshly rebuilt, its windows coated in old dust. It wasn't on campground maps, it wasn't in public records, but the lock on the door was brand new. Who was staying there? And what might still be waiting in these woods after 30 years? Claire stepped toward the old cabin. There was no address, no mailbox, no indication it belonged to the campground. But the window panes were clean from the inside. The drainage pipe looked recently replaced, and the padlock on the front door gleamed, still damp from last night's rain. She held the old photograph against her chest, eyes scanning every detail. This was the exact location captured in 1994. The trees had barely changed. The position from which the woman in the photo had been standing now lined up perfectly with the cabin's porch. This cabin wasn't new. It had always been there. But no one ever spoke of it. Claire looked around. No one. She gently tugged the doorknob. Locked. No surprise. But something caught her eye. Just beside the wooden steps, a shallow groove in the mud, like a dragged boot print. Next to it, a long brown hair tangled in the wooden slats, still damp and clinging to a bit of dried soil. Claire carefully retrieved a small Ziploc bag from her backpack, tweezed the hair, and sealed it. She wasn't sure if DNA could be extracted, but after 30 years, anything was worth collecting. Das That night, she stayed at a cheap motel 10 minutes from the lake. Thin walls, the smell of old wood and industrial air freshener clung to the sheets. But Claire couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop and clicked into a folder labeled Cedar Ridge 1994. She had spent years collecting clippings, scanned newspaper articles, even digitized audio from a local AM station that once aired a brief segment on Medeline's disappearance. She flipped through campground maps. The cabin never appeared on official site layouts. But when she searched a scanned copy of Litchfield's building permits from 1989, she stopped cold. Permit MAM-993 LF, signed by someone named Noreen Halbridge, requested a seasonal hunting shelter near Sabattus Lake, outside municipal oversight. Claire typed Noreen Halbridge into Google. Nothing but a short obituary from 2002. Noreen Halbridge, 68, passed away at her home near Lewiston, no immediate family. Occupation: retired medical aide. Described as reclusive. No listed permanent property. Claire stared at the word reclusive. She looked again at the photo. The woman in white, wide-brimmed hat. The face was blurry, but the posture, the build, a possible match. But if Halbridge was dead, who had been using the cabin since, and why had no one in her family ever mentioned this place? The next morning, Claire returned to the campground with a clearer plan. She stopped at the management office, a squat building near the entrance with a bell and a faded visitor check-in sign. Behind the desk sat Martha, around 60, silver-haired, wire-rimmed glasses, and a knit sweater with the Cedar Ridge logo. Claire showed her ID. I was here in summer '94, Donovan Crane family. There was a disappearance, Meline Crane. I'm revisiting the case. I have a few questions. Martha stared for a moment, then said quietly, "The little girl, Meline, right?" Claire nodded. "I remember. I've been working here since '82. The police came for 3 days. It was chaos. Do you recall a cabin near the tree line? One that wasn't on the map?" Martha went quiet. Her fingers absent-mindedly rotated a small key on her chain. There was, but it wasn't part of the official site. It predates the expansion. The last person to use it was some odd man. No one ever saw him, just paid in cash, every quarter, through the mail. "You don't have a name?" Claire asked, pulse quickening. "No. The envelopes were always marked CD, no return address. Claire froze. Her initials, Claire Donovan. Martha looked at her closely. You related to whoever that was? Claire answered slowly. Maybe, and I think someone's still using it, right now. Late afternoon. The sky turned gray. Claire returned to the cabin, carrying a lockpick kit and a small flashlight tucked into her coat. No one was around. The campground was nearly deserted. The padlock came loose easily. When the latch clicked open, there was no sound except her heartbeat pounding in her chest. The wooden door creaked as it opened, revealing a dark interior heavy with damp air and the smell of rotting wood. The cabin consisted of a single room, wooden floors, a folding bed, a lopsided dining table, a brick fireplace, no electricity, no plumbing. But the uneven dust patterns revealed someone had been there recently. On a bookshelf sat several old leather-bound journals. Claire opened a few. The handwriting was dense, neat, anonymous. No names, no dates. Just scattered thoughts. A little girl at the door. Laughter in the woods at night. The same figure returning day after day. The tone grew increasingly erratic. One scratched-out line near the end of a volume read, "She doesn't age, brown hair, still 9, she's not human." In the far corner sat a rusted metal cabinet. The lock was old but intact. After a few minutes of searching, Claire found a key buried in a desk drawer. It fit. Inside was a sealed plastic container wrapped tight with layers of aging tape. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. Inside, a pair of small white and red sneakers, worn along the edges, caked in dried mud. On the heel, barely visible beneath fading ink, 2 letters, M.C. Meline Crane. Claire's breath caught. These shoes couldn't be here if Meline had simply wandered off. They wouldn't exist if she'd vanished without a trace. She knelt on the old wood floor, clutching the container as her heart pounded. Someone had kept this for 30 years. They didn't call the police. They didn't tell anyone. They just kept it and stayed silent. Now Claire knew. Someone had been here, had known, and had chosen silence over truth. Claire spent the next day at the Litchfield Town Library. The journals from the cabin, nearly 10 volumes, handwritten over decades, had no author name, but their tone was unmistakable. Obsessive, fragmented, isolated. Someone who had seen too much. Someone trying to bury it. She began cross-referencing the handwriting with public records building permits, property forms, county aid applications. One name emerged. Caleb Dunley, a former gas station attendant who retired in 1998. He had rented land near Sabattus Lake but never formally registered ownership. Dunley died in 2009. No spouse, no known family. His death certificate listed his final residence as unnumbered cabin, north rim of Sabattus Lake. It was the cabin, and Dunley was the man behind the disturbing entries. Medical records revealed a brief psychiatric admission in 2004. No formal diagnosis, but in one nurse's report, a chilling note appeared. Patient repeatedly said, "The girl is outside the door. I didn't let her in. I didn't let her in." Claire visited the town cemetery. Caleb Dunley's grave sat alone in a far corner. No headstone, just a concrete slab etched faintly. CD, 1940-2009. She placed her hand on the cold surface. If he had seen Meline, if he had known she survived, why hadn't he told anyone? Fear, delusion, or had he stopped trusting his own mind? She remembered one final line in the journal. "I no longer hear it, but I know it's still nearby, waiting for someone to open the door." That evening, Claire returned to the cabin. She brought a flashlight, a camera, and a digital recorder. Under dim light, she searched every crevice. Behind a cracked section of plaster near the old fireplace, she found a rusted tin box. Inside, a faded Polaroid photo. A long-haired child stood outside the cabin door, not looking at the camera, eyes lowered, as if listening for something within. The clothes matched what Meline had worn the day she disappeared. Next to it, a folded scrap of paper with trembling handwriting. "I can't leave while it's still here, but if someone else comes, someone brave enough, tell it. It's not a ghost. It is what was left behind." Clare looked around the dark room. No sound except the wind pressing through the warped siding. But outside, something had changed. Not a noise, not a shape, but the unmistakable feeling that something was still here. Clare didn't leave town. After leaving the cabin, she spent several quiet days walking the forests around the lake, retracing the search grid used in 1994. A few rotting stakes remained, remnants of the original K9 perimeter. One zone, barely 200 meters from the road, had once triggered a K9 alert, but the ground was never dug beyond 2 feet. Clare submitted the strand of hair, the child's shoes, and a scanned copy of the Polaroid to a private forensics lab in Augusta. Results would take weeks. She needed more. At the town's public records archive, she reviewed every line of the original missing persons reports. Most of it was familiar, until she found a small, overlooked detail in one witness statement. A resident living near the campground had reported hearing a single short scream the day Meline vanished. The police had dismissed it, assuming kids playing. But the timestamp aligned almost exactly with when Meline went missing. Clare marked the location on her map and hiked there the next morning. The forest had thickened, but the terrain was slightly sunken, not by nature, but by time. One area looked deliberately refilled long ago. She brought a small shovel. Each dig felt like a pulse pounding in her chest. 3 layers down, a strange scent rose with the dirt. Then, metal. Clare backed up, breath caught. It was an old tin chest, the size of a small suitcase. She opened it. No body, but something worse. Inside, a handmade cloth doll, dressed in a floral pattern identical to what Meline wore the day she vanished. Clare recognized it. Fabric scraps her mother once sewed into clothes. The doll was torn at the neck, stitched back with black thread. Inside its belly, a photograph. Old, grainy, but unmistakably Meline. Standing by the lake, no expression, eyes dark. On the back, scrawled in fading purple ink, "I kept her, not to harm, but because she needed a witness." No signature, no date, but the message was clear. Meline may not have died. Someone may have taken her, not to kill, but to keep. That night, Clare didn't sleep. She sat in her car, parked in view of the cabin. Her hands rested on the wheel, eyes locked forward, breath shallow. Around midnight, as fog crept across the windshield, she saw it. A figure. Not tall, not clearly a child, just a silhouette standing by the cabin door, facing her. Clare never looked away. The figure outside the cabin stood motionless in the fog, small, slight, with a tilted head. It didn't move, didn't run, just stood there, facing her. She wasn't sure how long she stared. 5 minutes? 20? Time no longer mattered. She flicked on the headlights. The beam sliced through the mist. The figure was gone. No footprints, no movement, no sound. Clare stepped out of the car, hands shaking, feet crunching dead leaves. She approached the cabin slowly, flashlight sweeping across the porch and into the trees. No wind. The air felt frozen, like something was holding it still. She didn't open the door, just stood there. Then, a sound behind her, fabric brushing bark. She spun. The light cut through the woods. Nothing. Except something lying on the ground. A chalk drawing, smudged by rain. A small girl with long hair. Next to her, a house, the cabin, with 2 X's over the windows. Clare picked it up. The paper was soaked, close to tearing. On the back, one line, "I don't know the way back." She took the note to the motel. Stayed up all night. She searched for every case involving non-fatal child disappearances, instances where minors were kept alive, raised in isolation, or mistaken for replacements. One term appeared again and again: replacement syndrome, a psychological disorder where abductors didn't harm the child, but kept them to fill a void, a lost child, a dead sibling, a trauma they refused to let go of. Claire remembered the message inside the doll: not to harm, just to keep. It needed someone to witness. What if Meline wasn't the only one? What if someone had already lost a child and saw Meline as the substitute? Every line in Caleb Dunley's journals began to sound like a man crushed by memory, a man who had either witnessed Medeline's captivity or, worse, enabled it. The next morning, Claire returned to the cabin. She brought a metal detector and scanned the soil behind the structure, once a utility area on an old permit map. Within 20 minutes, the device beeped. Beneath damp leaves, she uncovered a small rusted tin box. Inside, a cassette tape labeled in red ink: June 1995, voice. She borrowed a tape player from the motel lobby, slid it in, hit play. First, static, then a young girl's voice. "My name is Meline. I live here, with the man. But I want to go home. Claire stopped breathing. Then, a man's voice, faint, trembling. "You can't go. You were lost. You're here to fill the space. One day, you'll understand." The tape ended in a burst of white noise. Claire sat frozen. Meline had lived after the disappearance. Someone had kept her, spoken to her, justified it. But now? Claire stared out the window. The fog near the cabin was thickening again. Only one question remained. Did Meline ever leave that place? Or was she still there, waiting for someone to say her name out loud? The audio tape made one thing clear: Meline had been alive after the day she disappeared. But the man's voice on the tape wasn't Caleb Dunley's. Claire played it again and again, comparing it to the one hospital recording from Dunley's psychiatric stay in 2004. Tone, cadence, breath control, all wrong. So who had kept Meline in 1995? Who spoke to her? Not as a prisoner, but as a replacement. Claire returned to public records, digging into land use permits issued between 1993 and 1996. One name stood out: Dr. Warren Halbridge, the same surname as Noreen Halbridge, who once filed to build the original cabin. Further search revealed that Warren was Noreen's younger brother, a former child psychologist. Practiced privately in Lewiston, Maine. Lost his license in 1997 after allegations of boundary violations with juvenile patients. No conviction. Case closed for lack of concrete evidence. Claire kept going. In 1995, Warren quietly acquired the plot of land behind Noreen's cabin, not through public records, but via handwritten transfer in Noreen's will. Everything pointed to a deliberate erasure. One of Caleb Dunley's journals included a passage scribbled over in black ink. Claire illuminated it with UV light. The hidden lines emerged. The man speaks softly. Always wears gloves. Comes in winter. Never says her name. Just calls her the little one. It matched. Warren's gloves were documented in medical routines, his visits in the off-season, and the timing of his revoked license, aligned perfectly with the end of all written traces of Meline. Claire tracked his past rentals to a disused weather outpost about a mile from the cabin. No signage, no trails. Inside, a wooden chair, a bedroll, oil lamps, and a broken tin box filled with dozens of old photos. At least 3 showed a girl with brown hair in a white dress, reading a book, standing by a window. No adults visible, but in one corner, the shadow of a gloved hand holding the camera. On the back of one photo, penciled faintly, Day 108. Still hasn't asked about her mother. Claire turned everything over to the Maine Bureau of Investigation. Audio recordings, journal excerpts, photos, forensic scans. 2 days later, a forensic analyst confirmed it. The man's voice in the 1995 tape was a 91% match to archived therapy tapes from Dr. Warren Halbridge. But Warren was already dead. Died by suicide in 2002. No note, body found weeks later. Neighbors had reported a strange smell. Back then, police labeled it chronic depression with reclusive behavior. But now it looked like Warren had taken the darkest secret in Litchfield with him to the grave. Claire stood outside the cabin one last time. The man's voice echoed in her head. One day, you'll understand. She didn't want to understand. She only wanted the truth to be known. October 2024. The Androscoggin County Sheriff's Office made it official. The 1994 disappearance of Meline Crane was now an active criminal investigation. The announcement rippled through Maine's local news, then across national outlets. Headlines screamed, "Cold case reopened after 30 years. Evidence suggests girl may have lived for years after vanishing." Clare was summoned as a key witness. She submitted everything: the audio tape, the journals, the photos, the shoes, the handmade doll. DNA testing confirmed the hair found inside the cabin was a match to Meline Crane, using remnants preserved in an old dental record. It was the first indisputable proof. Public reaction fractured. Some praised Clare. They believed the system had failed a little girl and ignored the only clues that mattered. Others accused her. Why bring this back now? Why not speak up earlier? She's just trying to be famous. Sheriff Raymond Stone, newly elected, called Clare into a private meeting. He admitted much of the original case file had been misfiled or lost entirely, making the reinvestigation feel like crossing a minefield in the dark. Clare requested to view the 1994 interview tapes. There were none. Only partial transcripts, some redacted, others faded. But within the scribbled notes, one name appeared that never made it into the official suspect list: Walter Crane, same last name as Meline, not blood-related, her mother's brother-in-law. He lived near the campground. Never questioned formally, but one buried line in the record revealed something chilling. He had worked as a therapy assistant at the Halbridge Clinic for 2 years, the same clinic where Warren Halbridge practiced, the same years leading up to Medeline's disappearance. After 1996, Walter vanished from all U.S. public records. No property, no tax filings, no medical trace. Clare hired a private investigator. Within a week, a lead surfaced. A man named W. Crane had lived under a false name near the Canadian border, in a jurisdiction that didn't share data with U.S. law enforcement before 2001. A photo arrived. Clare stared at it. It was him, the same man from a 1994 family photo, standing just behind Meline, one hand on her shoulder, barely smiling. Same face, same eyes, and worse, he was still alive. Canadian authorities were notified. A search of the listed residence found no one inside, but in the basement, a trove of personal items, hundreds of children's belongings, toys, dolls, crayon sketches, and in the center, a faded photograph. Meline, sitting in a wooden chair, expression blank, eyes locked on the lens. Next to her, a pair of adult hands resting on her shoulders. No face, just latex gloves, white. Clare didn't sleep that night. She replayed the audio tape again and again. One day, you'll understand. No, she didn't want to understand. She only wanted this to end. Mid-November 2024. The first snow settled over Sabattus Lake. The water was still, the trees silent, as if 30 years of unanswered questions had never disturbed this place. But for the first time in decades, a full forensic team was dispatched to excavate the land behind the old cabin. They started where Clare had once marked, the site of the tin box with the doll. Within hours, they uncovered human remains, not buried neatly. Shoved hastily into the soil with a fractured skull. Next to it, a decaying 90s-style backpack, still bearing a faded handwritten tag, Meline C. DNA results took nearly a month. Clare waited in silence. She returned to her late grandmother's house, sorting old drawers, revisiting childhood photos, rereading journals she once thought were memories, now reclassified as evidence. Then came confirmation. The remains were Madeline's. She had died, not the day she disappeared, years later. On December 3rd, a press conference was held at the town hall. The sheriff announced, Meline was not lost in the woods. She had been kept by one or more individuals connected to the Halbridge Therapy Center. Dr. Warren Halbridge was the one who received her. Walter Crane was the last man known to have had her in his care, but Walter was gone. His abandoned Canadian residence showed no signs of fleeing, no luggage, no passport. But the landline in the house had recorded one final outgoing call, a 42-second conversation, placed to a defunct monastery in rural Quebec. Interpol traced it. When police arrived, they found a crumbling shell of a building. In the basement, chalk marks, childlike scribbles, and hundreds of torn paper scraps pinned to the walls, all repeating the same message: I cannot leave because I am no longer me. No body, no note. But Clare believed. If Walter was still alive, then silence was his final confession. Late December. A memorial for Meline was held at Sabattus Lake. For the first time in 30 years, family and neighbors returned, not to ask where she had gone, but to finally say goodbye. Clare stayed in the back. In her hand, the last surviving photo of Meline, age 9, slightly crooked smile, a gap in her front teeth. No one remembered who took it. No one remembered when. A young officer beside her whispered, Do you think she's at peace now? Clare didn't respond. She just stared out at the frozen lake, where it had all begun and where it had ended. Because truth doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it only leaves a scar, and when the final candle flickered out, people walked away. Only Clare remained, and a breeze swept softly along the tree line. Meline Crane's story ends here, not with justice, not with forgiveness, but with a quiet sentence someone once wrote, I kept her because she needed someone to witness.